Hello, everyone. Just waiting for a few more minutes for everyone to join. Yeah, I think it's 4:03 and our active pull request list is pretty long. Let's get started. So just going from the earlier PRs. The first one, Bin, I see you're on the call. The add end-to-end test on ACR and AKS, is that ready for review?
Yeah, so there is one issue. So I think this PR, it cannot get the ID it cannot write the ID token and from the forked PR. And also I try to use the credentials directly, and also it can't get the secrets from the setting. And so I checked. I just did some investigation. I think the issue is that we should enable the permission to run workflow from the forked pull request. And there are two options. One is for the ID token and one for the get the secrets. But that's on the organization access level, and I don't have the access to change that.
Yeah, do you think Toddy have access or Luis have access?
No, this would be under the Dayslab org.
Oh.
So I just have another question. I'm sorry I joined a little late. For this issue, can you test with your own tokens, Minden?
But for the Azure login, can we just use because I see when I use credentials directly and when I use like the federated token.
Yes. So can these tokens be like on your fork? Can you set up your own cluster and use?
Yes. On my private repo, I can do it. It works.
Okay, because I don't think I don't know whether some get secrets permission on a fork PR is something that is that's an acceptable policy or not. So either way, just testing on your fork might be the best solution for this one.
Okay.
So Sajay, how do we selectively like run, how do we mark this test as run on forks only?
What do we get with that, by the way, like as an example?
Yep, Bin, go ahead.
Yes, so in the Dayslab, repo, so I just set up the secrets for example, the credentials, the client ID, and the application ID. But when I'm running the test, it cannot get those credentials.
Because it's a PR, right?
Yes.
I think it's also like, for example, the PR could accidentally output or send the secrets to other places. There's a lot of injection attacks and PRs that have happened before in different repos that I've worked with. So I don't think but as a maintainer, fork is something different, right? Like even as a maintainer, I think it just opens up a bunch of holes if we run it. So I don't know whether this is a good practice at this point.
Do you think we can just merge it and then everything should be working? And if it's working, we can revert it. Yeah.
No, I think that's fine, especially since you need the credentials. And if you're validated in the fork, I think we can trust that as, hey, this is running on my fork and it's fine.
Okay, I'll update it later, and so we can merge it for testing.
Yeah, I think it's good if you can just point to your run on your fork that this is passing here.
Okay, I'll test it there and make sure it's working.
Thank you, Sajay. Thank you, Bin. I think there's some action item on Jimmy on the AWS endpoint resolver. He's not on the call today. The next PR we have is No's PR, plugins as OCR artifact. Thank you for adding it to the agenda, No. Do you want to, Sajay is on the call today. Would you like to talk about the open items?
Yeah, that'd be good. So I can also give a demo like later on if we want to see like this thing in action. But overall, I wasn't able to make the call last week. I know Jimmy expressed some potential concern about what if we're mutating the Ratify container. And it really works really similar to how Terraform works with Terraform providers. Like when you get the Terraform executable and then you say I want to use the AWS provider, and then Terraform itself goes and downloads it and then it executes it. Very similar idea here, except for we're pulling from an OCI registry, and we're using the same auth providers that are already used with the or as refer store, and we've got a different PR to move that around to make it more suitable for both. As far as the comments go, oh, thanks for scrolling down. If that was the big open item, it doesn't bother me, but I'm not the only person. I'd like more feedback from, I guess, folks on the call and the maintainers. And then the comment about the documentation. I can also right now this isn't in a state where it's ready for review. I need to go test and everything like that. I wanted to make sure that we had agreement on kind of like yes, we want to accept this contribution, and kind of a timeline of, you know, are we looking to do this in the short term? I know there's a lot of other things going on for RC1 in the backlog on GitHub, or is this going to be a deferred thing for after RC1? But I can have the code ready to go either way. So I just wanted to open that up for discussion, and if we need to have that discussion at the end so we get to the other PRs, I'm also good with that as well.
Go ahead, Sajay.
My vote would be to put this immediately after RC1, because we have like 2 weeks for RC1, right?
Right.
The one item that I would like to maybe make sure that we have is this feature. Is it something that we can put behind a flag that would, let's say, for example, enable remote plugins or enable remote OCI plugins, and if it's false, the default is false, and if you add a plugin, you have to turn this flag on. Reason is that, let's say we ever decide to call this out as a configuration, as a required configuration, and we enforce it through policy saying that we will not enable remote plugins at all. We can just validate this flag instead of going and looking for other places, right? So that's one of the things that I would kind of like recommend if you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely add that. We recently added a Ratify log level. And I think what I will plan to do is pull that environment, basically parsing in the flags, feature flags, into a single place, and we'll feature flag this one so that it's false by default. And if you want it turned on, you could set that value in your Helm chart, activate remote plugins, and then point to the docs on how to configure that. I think that's a good idea.
And the goodness of that would be that even if we have configured it and checked it in, and if the flag is false, it won't affect anything.
Right.
And worst case, for some features that we kind of try out, right? If you want to change the config, it'll only affect people who have turned it on. It doesn't affect anybody else. It just keeps the flexibility over time.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And then for people that may have like a high security environment where they don't want dynamic plugins, they prefer to do the maintenance to bake in plugins and validate those and harden their environment. They could do that, and they would get that by default without having to worry about potential security holes or mutable containers or anything like that.
Cool. That's all. That's the only feedback I had.
Sounds great. Just scrolling back to the open items, the next step. I think everything's been covered, correct, Noel?
Yeah, so that the first bullet point for next steps, that has an open PR that has been approved once, but it's been up to date with main now. I'll add tests, I'll add that feature flag in the docs and all the nice things there. And then I think that consider moving plugins. We don't have to do anything with that currently. We're good to keep I think we have SBOM and license checker and something like that in the Ratify image by default. And those are free and happy to stay there. And especially with the feature flag where it's disabled by default, there's really, it should be a very low risk change to accept. So I'll get that tidied up and submitted as a real PR soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Mm-hmm. Back to our list. Yep, Noel, you said this one is ready for review as well. It's up to date.
Yeah, this is one, it's just moving the auth provider out of, so if both the downloader, the plugin downloader that you opt into and the refer store using the same auth provider, it made sense for it to live in a common folder rather than under the refer store folder. That's the only change. You've approved it in the past, and we were waiting on some input from, I think, Akash, just if there were any questions. But I've tested and manually, and this works. And so this is just up to date and needs another review with the latest merges, but should be good to go.
Okay, great. Related to the auth provider, Jimmy last week had a question on can you configure multiple auth providers at the same time? So for example, if you had Azure auth provider, like workload identity provider, and then also want AWS provider, I was having a look at the Aura's store Golang struct. It looks like we only allow one auth provider. Is that correct? Like you cannot enable both at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like right now, if you're using ORAS store, you would only have the one auth provider for that. Now you could have a different auth provider for your verifier plugin thing, I guess. But I think if we want to invest in that, we would probably want to take a look at what scenarios we want to enable and post RC1, change that to a map or an array or something like that, figure out how we want to divvy things up. If we're doing like multiple registries, I definitely see that as a need for folks in the future that have, let's say I'm an infra team at a company and my customer, each of my departments in my org are a customer of mine and they all have different registries. I'm not sure how Ratify is going to work with a single instance, but that's probably a post RC1 design, document, and investigation and things like that, from what I've seen.
Yeah, thanks for confirming. Yeah, since Jimmy had a question, I will get back to him and just to confirm that we only have one supported today. Okay. Mutation support and cache to Aura Store is in draft. Binbin, do you have any questions or are you blocked at all for the cache to Aura Store? Are you just working on the feedback?
Oh, the cache PI is just under review by my team. And also, yesterday Sadia mentioned that we need to consider the license issue. And I checked the license of the caching library and it's under the Apache 2.0. So I think it's fine for now.
Thanks for checking. Okay, for the JSON schema validator, I'm working with Matt. Just there's a few minor feedback on that. And the gatekeeper version matrix, we had a little discussion this morning offline. Binbin, were you able to look at the chat history?
Yeah, I just checked that.
Yeah, so the recommendation by Seratak is to remove the private key and have a manual step to generate it in the quick start.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. Thank you.
Thanks. I have a PR work in progress. I will have it ready probably tomorrow for review and I'll tag Anish when it's ready. Next one from Joshua, move nested reference logic to executor.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this last week. So this is the other PR that I had mentioned where instead of having the config live with the executor, the config still stays with the verifiers for nested references. And this just moves the logic over to the executor. So not super high priority, but it does make things a little bit more clear on what's going on and kind of sets us up for the future when we want to decouple nested references from verifiers. There's a linked issue that Kara had created that this sort of sets it up for. So just up for review whenever.
Thanks. I had a quick look. I just had one question. Mm-hmm. Nested reference it looked like a string from the configuration, but I see this is an array of strings. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so the configuration currently, if you're writing it in the config.json, it's a string and each artifact type is separated by a comma. But when you actually get it in the code, it becomes a string array. Okay. So that's why you see that there. And actually, it's kind of an interesting note. You can actually put whatever you want in that string as long as there's something there. It will attempt to get every artifact under that artifact that specifies that. So if you say SBOMs have nested references that are, you could put whatever string you want and it'll grab every artifact underneath that. So just an interesting thing that wasn't exactly clear to me when we started this project. So.
Got it. You're saying like it's how it behaves today. Like it doesn't.
That's correct.
Got it. Yeah. Thanks for the note. And now you've clarified it by any string here enables nested reference.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, one of us would be able to pick it up to review it this week. Next one is by Jeff.
Oh, yeah, so that's just updating the existing SBOM verifier to instead of just check against the contents, like a basic generic check, to be a bit more in depth. It uses this tools-golang SPDX library, and it checks the validity of the formatting of like the given SPDX. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay, thanks. We'll take a look this week.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
And Sajay, you've added this one to the agenda.
Yes. The goal of this was to establish a set of folks as the maintainer slowly and have at least formalize what you folks have already been doing. It's not something because it's missing right now. We're using teams and a set of permissions to kind of like call out who the maintainers are, who's supposed to merge and things like that. So it's just adding a set of code owners and a maintainers file into the repo. It doesn't do anything else. But once this is merged, my hope is that 4 of you would be responsible for now, at least to make sure the PRs are merged and the community is healthy in some way. And if and when we kind of like discuss the donation process, we'll figure out how we need to revisit and update the maintainers file and things like that. So there are people who might have permissions to this repo, but for example, me, I don't expect to be merging PRs, and I would kind of like step back as only a regular community member for some amount of conversation, but the actual work is done by the people who are contributing most. So that's what I wanted to kind of like bring forward.
Yep. Sounds good to me. I see you've added Toddy, me, Akash, and Bin Bin. Any feedback, Bin Bin? It looks good to me. Sajay, do you want me to approve this one and merge when it's ready?
I would like to get approval from Bin Bin, and I think Toddy's approval is kind of like stale now. So, and Akash, because I'm signing him up for this. It would be good to kind of get his feedback.
Sure. I will. Okay. I will leave it.
Yeah,
We can wait.
do I need to reapprove that? Because I think I approved it.
I added a code owners file, so maybe it got stale.
Okay, I'll look at that again.
Toddy, Akash. Bin Bin.
Hey, Susan, can you use our GitHub name so we get notification?
Oh, sure. Toddy. Cool. That's posted.
And Susan, you either one of you will probably drive merging that in, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Once everybody signs up, I will merge that. And the last PR, Xinghe, I think you've just submitted this one.
Yes, it is for a small fix. It is because it is for the host provider of managed identity. It is because we introduced the store CRD later, but it missing the host provider configuration for Azure managed identity, and it overrides the configs in the config map. So so if someone followed my document to use managed identity as host provider, it will finally get a 4.1 auth error. So it is fixed for the chart.
Got it. Yeah, I'll be able to sign off and merge this after the meeting or tomorrow.
No hurry. Thank you.
Thanks. Next on the agenda, I've been working on the certificate store for Ratify to replace or in addition to the secret store driver. So I have the key vault library submitted for review as a PR right now. And I just want to run through the sample CRDs, like what the CRDs would look like once we integrate with the key vault library. So should be a quick review, and I'm glad Binbin and Xinghe are both on the call today. So full public preview, I've added to this document that the certificate store would only be available in the Kubernetes scenario because the workload identity auth path is the only supported auth for RC1 milestone. And I just want to check with everyone else, like in the future, do we want to support certificate store for the CLI code path? Like, is there a customer scenario there?
I actually don't know the answer to that.
Okay, cool. Well, just letting everyone know, like for now, we will only be supporting the Kubernetes workload identity auth path. So the customer experience would be, instead of having the secret store, the name is so long, sorry, secret store driver, CSI driver, we will be defining a certificate store for Ratify where you would say, okay, I want to fetch my certificates from the Azure provider, and here is the name of the key vault. And you would provide the name and the version of the certificate. This is kind of like a simplified from the CSI driver. The CSI driver, like you can provide an alias, and I think there are some other properties, but I've taken the alias out because I think because we're not mounting the file onto disk, at most we'll just need the certificate name for debugging, for like output messages to say, oh, we've loaded certificate 1, we've loaded certificate 2. We don't need aliases. So once the customer defines the certificate store, they would reference the certificate store from their verifier CRD. So I will add a new property in the parameters called verification cert store. And I had a discussion with Binbin, and we thought this would be a map from the trust store to an array of the key vaults. So right here, we defined there's 2 cert stores as certs and certs1 that maps to their list of key vaults. And the trust policy, which contains the trust store, would have the ability to say, okay, which are the stores that I trust? So in this configuration, even though there's 2 Ratify cert store defined, the trust policy would only allow public certificates from this store. Binbin, does that align with what we've discussed last week?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Thanks. I see Noel. Go ahead.
I had a question. Would in the previous section where you're configuring the key vault, would users have to individually add every individual certificate that they want to use, or would they be able to, trust anything that's in a trusted key vault? Like where my mind is thinking is if I want to support, multiple teams and they don't all use the exact, like they might have the same root certificate, but maybe not the same like leaf certificate, and they just want to run an app. They would have to get the certificate store thing updated. Like they have to do more steps. Like we have to specify it more times. That's okay. I just want to make sure that that's an intentional design, not that we like that friction. Just wanted to ask if that's what we want users to have to do. Yeah.
Thanks for asking. So it was on our roadmap to support enumeration. So we thought it'll be convenient if the customer just have to specify the key vault and we would do the enumeration. It is listed as an assumption to be validated. So for RC1, the customer will need to specify each individual certificate. You won't need to specify the version. If this version is empty, then we'll just fetch the latest. Yes, and we had that discussion recently with Toddy. Toddy, go ahead.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that this kind of is inherent in also how notation works. We had the discussion because certain customers, they would like to have very granular control on that, which means that they don't want to, let's say, trust everything that's in the KMS or Azure Key Vault or whatever it is, which means that we should have capability to have very broad control and very, very granular control. So we have customers saying, oh, everything that's in my key management system, I trust it. So what is the easiest way to add it? And I may have maybe, I don't know, 100 certificates there. They don't want to list those individually. We have customers who are saying, I have, let's say, hierarchical structure that I would like to use. Let's say I trust some intermediate certificate, and that's how I define my trust. And we have customers that want to explicitly list each individual certificate. So we are still validating those kind of assumptions because they are based on discussions that were not specifically targeting notary and how we do the policy. As Susan said, so for V1, we are looking to have really the individuals, but in the future, we need to figure out what will be the best way to really provide a little bit more user-friendly or easier configuration on, let's say, hierarchies or saying I want to trust the whole key vault. Does that help, Noel?
It sure does. Yeah. Thank you, Susan and Toddy. That sounds perfect. I just wanted to make sure we were thinking about that. And if, post V1 or whatever, we wanted to have an all flag, enumerate key vault true or, a mode hierarchy, whatever that needs to look like in the future. It sounds like we have that option available to us in the future, but it's not a short-term plan. So thank you very much.
Yeah. And we need to also look at how this is managed in other KMS systems, because we have customers that are not using Key Vault, for example, they are using HashiCorp, or we have also AWS KMS or others. So unfortunately, it will take us a little bit more time to really start satisfying those different key storage systems.
Thanks for the details, Toddy. Know if you ever run into like customers that would desire the enumeration support, do let us know.
Yeah, we'll do. We'll file issues and make sure that we get everybody hooked up with the details and they can come join the community. Thank you.
Thanks. I see Xinghe, you had your hand up.
Yes, in fact, the Toddy has partially answered my questions. In fact, I just want to ask the third store, the certificate store here is by default using workload identity. Is that correct?
Yes. Does it help? Should I rename these like to workload identity client ID to kind of like we want to support other client IDs?
I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if we have planned to support multiple auth provider in the future, like Oris.
Yeah. I think maybe for now, leave it as client ID. I do see the
Yes,
provider have the-
yes, it makes sense to me. Yeah. So for the for if customer is not using any keyword, they just want to hardcode the cert, the old way is still working.
Correct.
It is still working. Okay.
Yes.
Get it.
There will be some logic like in the notary get certificate method, like to see if verification cert store is like null or not. If it's empty, then it'll fall back to the existing mechanism.
Okay, get it. Thank you.
Thanks. And I just want to check with everyone again. Does anyone have any suggestions on the CRD name? Is certificate store sound okay? Like we have a lot of like, cert stores and trust stores in our configuration already. So
Yeah, Susan, actually, and apologize for my ignorance, but how the CRD looks like, for example, if I want to use SIG store, is it the same CRD or is it?
so yeah, that's a good question. So the certificate store, I imagine it'll be the same. So you can store your cosign public cert in the Azure Key Vault. And the verifier, you would define a cosign verifier, and the plan is to also support Key Vault integration with the cosign verifier, but it does not work today. So I think there's some challenge, like the notary verifier, the interfaces allow a get certificate call on verification, but the cosign verifier initializes with the like the certificate have to exist when it initializes. So I have to look a bit more on the load order of the like when would we load the CRD versus when would the cosign verifier initialize. So at the moment it's not supported, but the plan is to support Key Vault integration for cosign verifier. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and what you're saying is that currently we only support the record flow, which is the transparency log verification with cosign. Is that correct, or?
Today the cosign verifier works with like an array of path, so it'll load the I think it was public key files when cosign verifier initializes.
Okay, we can take this offline. I still need to make myself familiar with how the verifiers work, but you are saying that even for both, like whether it's notary or cosign, we expect that if the keys and the certificates are stored in Azure Key Vault, we'll have the same CRD configuration for certificate store. Is that correct?
Yeah, so today let's bring out the config map, because that'll give us an idea of what it looks like right now. And so if cosign is enabled, this is how we configure the verifier today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm imagining, so right now, right, this is the notary verifier, and verification certificate points to a local path. And cosign verifier has a property called key, and this points to the verifying public certificate.
Which is a local path, which is a mounted volume on the pod. Okay.
Yes. And when we switch to the certificate store for Ratify, in the future, I imagine you would just the customer would put a reference to the CRD
Mhm.
where the path is today.
Okay. Okay. And for cosine, we will eventually do the same when in the key property, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
I
No,
have a I have a question on this because with the changes since notation RC1, the trust store has kind of like an opinionated, funky file structure where it's like it's not just a blank cert, it's actually it's trust store / the name of the trust store / cert / whatever your cert name is. If the Key Vault downloader, if you will, the CRD, that goes and grabs the thing and then stores it somewhere to get that key, puts it into kind of a notation flavor of path, including like the notary / whatever, cosine, they're stored in a different way. Where will the CRD processor actually like store these certs? Is it going to copy them locally and then use them that way? I think it's kind of rambling, but you get the idea.
yeah. I think I got the idea. The CRD would fetch the public certificates in memory. It's the current plan. I haven't really finished prototyping the end-to-end, but I think our idea is we're going to keep it in memory. And when the notary verifier calls the get certificate, like we could even just like give it the certificate bytes.
Okay, so rather than having the notation library look up from disk, you're just going to hand the bytes there, and then in the future we would update the cosine once it has support for the CRD to also do something, I don't know, similar or extended with that. Okay.
Yeah, I need to look at the cosine like constructor and the like verification. Like I'm hoping that their interface allows for that sort of workflow, but we haven't validated.
Makes sense.
Yeah, but we'll definitely try to explore that. Yep, go ahead, Toddy.
And just one more question. Have we thought of what will be the schema to, because when we have different, let's say, KMS systems, we need to have a way to, let's say when I put in this configuration, let's say Azure Key Vault / the name of the key. So we need to have different schemas that we put in the configuration. Have we discussed those? Are they specified or?
Yeah, so back to the certificate store. Toddy, the question is like, is this schema like fixed, right?
No, I was more looking at the previous configuration document that you were showing in the Ratify configuration. So if you go back to the other tab, right? So if you scroll down in the verification certs, you have strings which are actually local paths. But
Yep.
when we change this to, let's say, storing it in memory, right? Is the assumption that I can, for example, have my question is how I'm gonna tell this configuration that this is not a local path, but it will be Azure Key Vault or HashiCorp Key Vault or AWS KMS. That's kind of the question.
Yeah. So for this certificate store, in this example, I should update this example. That's a good point. So we're keeping the verification certificate in the verifier config, but if there is a cert store provided, we will use what's defined here, but both are supported. So the verification, sorry, what's the property name? Verification cert can still, it's still valid parameter under the parameters. So if we had like KMS or other certificate, like our options are like maybe add another parameter because it'll look completely different, right?
Okay. Okay, I think Sajay is answering my question. Okay, yeah, you can forget it.
No, I have a question. I have the same question. So does the CRD take precedence over the configuration? Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
For RC1 at least, I think if there's a need, we can like the auth provider, we can say, user, please only specify one, or if you specified all of them, we could load all of them and try to figure out like, are they all valid, or but we have to think more there.
Sounds good. I also have a couple of comments on naming and whatnot. So feel free to take a look afterwards.
Okay, great. Let me bring up. Go ahead.
Susan, just to kind of, I'll be curious to see how, for example, I can go and let's say mix certificate stores. Let's say if I use certificates from Azure Key Vault and HashiCorp, how the CRD will look like, and how eventually I don't know whether the configuration will matter in this particular case. But the question that I have in my mind right now is, so if I have a application that uses certificates from Azure Key Vault, from HashiCorp, and some actually locally mounted certificates, how the configuration and the CRDs will look like.
Yeah, when you say configuration, you mean configuration for Notary, right?
Yeah, configuration for Notary. And to make it a little bit more complex, if I also use SigStore, so that will be a really comprehensive example. And where I'm coming from is, let's say you have a multi-tenant service that actually runs customer workloads from different customers that actually have different key vaults, different HashiCorps, and this is something for the future. It's not for for V1, but I just want to make sure that we are thinking a little bit more into the future.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks, Sajay.
Go ahead now.
Thanks. I'll be the sub champion of the runner up of scope creep. There was you said a moment ago that CRDs would take the precedence over the config. And this is a topic that I've run into with verifiers and stores, in that right now when the CRDs get loaded, that it actually has both active at the same time. So if you have a config JSON from the Helm chart that has Notary v2 and maybe you've got cosign enabled, and then you go add new verifiers via CRD, you can actually overwrite the built-in ones with kind of like different flags and options. So it becomes a little bit confusing as to like what's actually running. And I didn't know, I'll file an issue for this where we can discuss, but I didn't know if we wanted to take the stance that like if we're in Kubernetes, we just do everything with CRDs, and then we kind of disable loading those sections from config JSON entirely. I don't want to derail, but I just wanted to bring the topic up and start thinking about it. That would be my preference. I'll even volunteer to do the work, whatever. But if we like that idea, I can file an issue and make sure that we
Yeah, I definitely like that idea.
Okay.
It's very confusing, if you have both defined what is taking precedence, and the way why we have what it is today. It's some of the properties in executor, it hasn't been converted into CRD, so we still need the configuration file. So if we just completely depend on the CRD, where do we move the property in the policy and the executor?
Cool. I can file an issue for discussion and then plan to pick up an item to convert the config properties in the Helm chart over to being CRDs, just all up, and making sure that everything works and get that tidied up, and then have kind of a flag in executor that says, ignore these sections from the config if you're in Kubernetes. Thank you. I think that'll make life simpler for me for testing at least.
Yep. Any other comments? Oh, yes, I was going to bring out Sajay's suggestion on naming, but Yeah, looks like I'll read the comments offline. We only have 10 minutes left. So no, you did mention you want to do a demo. So I want to allow time for that. Are you ready for the demo right now?
Yeah, I can do that. I restarted my code space.
Great.
Let me.
I think there's an option to make you the host, and then then you can share screen.
Perfect. Okay, let me figure out.
There's a green button that says
sharing. Yeah, I've got to pick the right window because I've got a widescreen monitor and it's not fun for anybody if I have too many things going. Cool. Are people able to see my VS Code window? Sorry about the theme here.
Yep. I can.
So yeah, what my plan on what's demo here. I just wanted to give a demo of like the plugins as OCI artifacts, the PR that's out there now working. So I'll just go ahead and get it started. So first we'll take a look at the plugins directory. Oops, sorry about that. Try to make it a little bit weird for me to mess it up. So there's nothing in that directory currently, which is great. That's what we want. And so my intent is that I want to verify some SPDX signatures with an out of tree plugin that gets downloaded. So here I've downloaded Cube Scheduler and I've got its bill of materials and I've signed it myself, which is kind of bogus, but you can see here, this is the thing that I actually want to get a plugin for and activate and use. So that's great. So by default, my config JSON, which we're kind of familiar with, just looks like this. It's just the default Notary v2. And so what I'm going to do now is add this new section. And what we're saying here is I want my sample plugin. That's just the name that I've given it. Artifact types, that's all the same. This is the new property for source. And so I've given it an OCI registry, an artifact location, and that's where it's going to download from. So if I wanted to download and upgrade my verifier plugin to v2, it would look something like this. And the next time that configuration took effect, sample would now point to v2 instead of v1. And with Sajay's idea, assuming you have the feature flag turned on. So we'll get that added. So what I'm going to do here is add that to my list of verifiers. So we'll do that. And then I'll hop back over into my script. And we're going to run Ratify. So I've got this wired into the VS Code debugger just so that we can kind of see what's going on a little bit easier. Basically, it's running Ratify serve. And then I'm going to make a request against this thing. And so this is representative of what Gatekeeper would send to Ratify. I'm going to send a provider request. And the thing that I want to validate is the container that we looked at with or as Discover. So let's take a look. See if my demo works. My copy paste didn't work. Interesting. There we go. So let me scroll into what we can hear. This is the response from Ratify, which is good. And here you'll see that we have gone through and the notary report has come through. That's expected. That's what we had by default. That's good. And then now we've got the sample verifier has kicked in. That means it's downloaded and run and actually executed. We've got it running with nested references. So here's notary validating the notation on that SPDX. And then finally, if we go and look into the plugins directory, we can see that that sample plugin was downloaded from the registry, downloaded, executed, and then it's good to go. To contrast that with kind of what people have to do today before we land this feature, that kind of looks like that's an HTTP, I believe. It's a little bit of an involved process. You have to build the plugin yourself or get a plugin somehow, copy it into your Docker file, or do some silly things in the Helm chart to mount it in there. It's pretty cumbersome. And so I think this will be a nice experience when we get this all cleaned up and landed, first thing after RC1. Are there any questions before I give up the screen?
This is so cool. I just wanted to verbalize Toddy's comment.
Thanks, Sajay. But yeah, it's actually cool. Very cool.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as I was kind of toying with the idea and developing it, I was like, I don't want to reinvent a package manager for plugins. That would be really silly because there's too many package managers, but OC Artifacts makes a really great generic package manager for kind of whatever you want to jam in there based on the artifact and media type. So it was nice that it worked out for this project.
Very cool.
Maybe something that other things could do in the future if we ever wanted to show and tell that idea.
Just as maybe as a recommendation, this is really cool for like a developer workflow. If you were to kind of check it in, I think a recommendation of kind of pinning it to a digest of that specific package will also give a sense of we know kind of exactly what we're getting, right? So that might be a good conversation to have, and less concern of, hey, are you pulling something random? No, you're pinned the exact digest of it. It's probably more secure than downloading a curl binary from somewhere with a version or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I can plan to, right now I'm resolving the manifest to a digest and then pulling the digest, of course. I can remove that first step so that you always have to provide a digest to be kind of that exact secure by default. And then if we wanted to, add a feature flag for, allow tags or something, if somebody wanted that feature, we could always go add that later, but kind of default to, I know exactly what I'm getting experience.
Yeah, because in Ratify, we kind of like push Gatekeeper to do the mutation and get the digest right. So it makes the conversation easy that everything inside Ratify is digest based, and it's just more a conversation piece more than anything else. But I think I love the experience that you can get it up and running with tags, but from an actual deployment point, we know this is the recommended way of doing it. So that jump off point is a little interesting, but it's still the way that I would have the conversation, like start developing, test with tags, and then move on to an actual digest.
I'll see what I can do with that idea. Maybe that's another flag that we set to digests like digest only by default when we deploy the Helm chart, but maybe for a local dev experience
Sure.
like that, it allows tags. I don't know. I'll see what I can come up with and get some feedback in the issues and PRs.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you. This is kind of where I was hoping plugins would go, because it's going to be hard to author every plugin into Ratify, but over time we can decide what we want to bake in and what we want to get from different places. Really cool. Thank you.
And as the king of the scope creep, so the first thing that actually comes to my mind is how can I exploit this thing? And can I actually serve a malicious plugin? So that begs the question of how do we verify that those plugins are not malicious or they are signed and so on.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I had the same thought, because I think I had this thought earlier. I was like, well, what if I curl and it's a Bitcoin miner or something? It's something nasty.
Yeah.
We have access to. I think it's fair game to say we have access to the internal Ratify plugins. So we have Notary V2 and whatever we've got baked in, and if we want to use those verifiers to verify plugins themselves, that seems like fair game to say that all plugins must be signed with a signature that I have specified, right? Same as we would do with a container image. I don't know if that's a requirement for right away or if that's a nice to have. I don't know.
So I don't know, it's not right away, but I don't think it's nice to have, because there was a nice article how plugins can be exploited in Visual Studio Code just last week, and this immediately make me thinking, okay, how can I exploit also the plugins for notation and Ratify? So it's a plugin. We are giving the possibility for other people to develop them. Of course, the bad guys will start develop those, and how we can prevent them being used in malicious way. So food for thought.
Okay, I think we're almost at time. Anything else to discuss, anyone? Okay, thanks for the discussion. It was great discussion today. Yeah, we'll see you next week. Take care.
Thanks, Susan, for driving that. See you, folks.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.